over to Herman.
Ginger, thank you very much for the introduction. This is Friday and we are live. Okay, I want to start by giving you a little bit of information about me. Once we became successful with peaches that we had grafted, I never intended to sell any, but the wife sold them and she soon became the peach lady. One thing I want to tell you that I'm going to try to stay on a certain path today. However, there are times you may think I will be going off path, but hopefully I'm able to get back on reasonably quick, okay? Okay, our goal is to expose you to why, how, and when grafted may be needed, with some of the options and choices that are available to you, okay? Under the heading of propagation, asexual is the method because we're not using seeds. All we're going to talk about today is the graft. That's a very narrow path, but we're going to talk about the wedge or the cleft grafting. That's even smaller because there's a lot of other techniques out there that's available to you, okay? Now, in the wild, nature has done some of its own grafting. This happens to be two talus that have been together so close that they're now united. You can cut the bottom of one off and leave the top of the other, and you will actually have a natural graft. I have actually seen pecan trees that were in touch for a long period of time that became grafted. Okay, now, a lot of us, when we buy a new house or whatever, we ask, are our trees grafted? Well, let's look at them. On the top right, you'll see a peach. And if you look down at the line, the bottom of it, what you'll see is there's a color change in the bark. That tree has been grafted. Now, if you look at the lower photograph, that is a close-up of that union between a wild Chickasaw plum and an early amber peach. The graft was successful for about 5 years. And what happened is at the graft, the peach got larger, but the rootstock stayed the same size. Now, when you look at pecan trees, and a lot of people are interested in those pecans and they have them in their yard and they wonder, is my tree grafted? What you want to do is look at the bark and tell if there is a change in the bark, if there is a color change, appearance in the bark itself. Quite often you go at the very ground level and look there for that bark change. Some people may graft them higher up off the ground, and if you're in a pasture where there's cattle and they've been grafted there, they may be grafted from the tailgate of a pickup. So you have a good ways to look in there and see, make sure that you know if your tree is grafted or not. Okay, why graft? You may want to clone a desirable variety that has high quality, yields, or disease resistant, something that you want on a rootstock. You may want to speed up the production of nut or fruits by decreasing the adolescent period of the tree, and we're going to get into that in a second. You may want to produce better fruit or nut on old trees. With grafting, you can convert an orchard to another variety, maybe a more profitable one or a better one. You may want to use a desirable rootstock, something that grows in the ground that works real well in your heavy or light soil or whatever. When you're producing peaches in the state of Texas, the rootstock is important because there are some areas that some rootstock work better in. Now, if you're looking for a rootstock, I suggest you try your large commercial nurseries, and you may even start a year in advance because they may have to actually get or locate that variety for you. Now, in many cases, and one of the biggest problems there is out there, people with plum trees don't have a pollinator. A lot of times they buy a tree and not even aware they need a pollinator. So if you have a tree, a plum that produces a lot of blooms and no fruit, then you probably need a pollinator, especially if you have bees. So one of the methods for finding this out is when your tree is in bloom, you go through the neighborhood and you find another tree that is blooming, ask permission and cut a few limbs off of that tree, stick it in a bucket, hang it in your tree. With bees, if you now set fruit, then the plum tree that you put in the bucket is the pollinator. So that means you need to take graft wood from that pollinated tree and graft into your tree, and then you should start having that fruit every year as long as the bees are working for you. A sport. Nature sometimes will genetically alter a bud, and that little limb or whatever, it may produce a fruit similar, but not exactly to the rest of the fruit on the tree. In commercial orchards, apple orchards, they have people that walk these orchards to find that one limb that produces apples that are different. It may have a better color, size, but there's something that they're looking for, and they're looking for something that's better, something that attracts the eyes, okay? Now, we may also want what we call a fruit cocktail tree, and that's 2 or 3 different peaches on one tree or peaches and plums on the same tree. With this method of grafting, you can accomplish that also. Now, you also may want to do some grafting with plumeria, several varieties on one rootstock. Or how about a crepe myrtle that has different colors on it? Or if you're into heirloom tomatoes, you may want a better rootstock, so you may have to graft your heirloom tomato on top of a rootstock that can tolerate root knot nematodes and in our heavy soil. Now, what do you want to do? I find that most people that want to graft, they don't have a plan. A plan is important. What they do is they wake up someday and they're ready to graft and nothing's ready. Maybe they don't have the scion to put on top. This is in the backyard. This was a apium that was purchased. The nursery said it had 200 hours of chill, which is just right for where I live. It never bloomed. It's probably 400 to 600 hour chill. Who confused everything? So now I'm ready to cut the tree out, but before I do that, I need to preserve some plums that do very well in our area. So the 3 top circles are 3 different varieties of plums that do very well. On the bottom left is a early amber peach tree. All of this wood that I need from this tree has been cut and is in the refrigerator at this particular time. Okay, this is the same tree from the opposite side, but about a year earlier. February the 17th. Okay, if you look at this tree right here, if you look up here at the top where those look like white bags are, those are those plums that were grafted last year in about, or yeah, they were grafted last year in January. If you look real close, you can see the green foliage on them. They're already starting to grow. This photograph was taken the 17th of February. We're still putting on other varieties, okay? Now, if a person needed to or wanted to, you could take this same tree and get down here, probably about 2 foot from the ground, and all these larger limbs, you could graft every limb there. Or, I mean, even different varieties. Even if you, excuse me, you could also go to the center of the tree and find one limb that's growing straight up and cut it and put one graft in the middle of that tree. When that tree or that graft starts to grow, you could then take everything else off the tree if you wanted to. Now, the main thing I want to show you on this particular photograph is when you get ready to graft, you get comfortable, because you don't want to be in a bind, because when you're in a bind, you don't do as well, okay? Now, sometimes people want to graft, especially after the day, somebody that's, well, I'm going to go out and do it. But they don't have the confidence they need yet. So what they're going to do is go up this little limb out here, and at the very top somewhere, they're going to try to graft it. It'll probably work, but if the further down you come, the more energy that's going to be pushing upward and push those buds out on your graft. Now, at my daughter's house, there is a pear tree. Now, what happened is I went to a Texas Rare Fruit Growers Scion exchange one time, and I had the opportunity to pick up a quince rootstock with a worn pear grafted on top of it. I didn't want the worn pear, but I wanted the rootstock. So I took the rootstock to my daughter's house, planted it, and then grafted the Biscamp pear on top of it. The rootstock has a tendency to dwarf the tree on top. And I didn't want that real large, big tree. This tree is doing very well now, and I can tell that it is slightly dwarfed. Okay, grafting to production. We want to shorten the adolescent period of the tree when we graft. Let me start off by saying this. If you plant a pecan tree in the front and one in the back, same year, about a year later, it should be about, at the beginning of the second year, it'll probably be about a quarter inch in diameter, maybe slightly larger. That tree can be grafted at that time. So let's graft the tree in the backyard and leave the front one in the yard just like it is. So the backyard we graft, and in 7 years, it should be producing pecans. And it's going to produce pecans identical to where your graft wood came from. If you got graft wood from your neighbor across the street, your tree is going to produce the same pecans. Now, there are times when these trees will produce in a shorter period of time, produce those nuts in a shorter period of time. Now, the rootstock will have or may have some influence over how quick this tree produces. This is what we talk about when we say shorten the adolescent period of the tree. Another example is that oranges, if they're grafted, will produce in about 7 years. If you plant the seed, there's a high probability that it will produce fruit just like the fruit where the seed came from. However, it may take 8 or 10 years. But if we graft, it'll only take 4. And if you look up here under pears, take 5 years to graft. I've known people that buy a pear tree, 3 or 4 years later, it hadn't produced anything. They're ready to take it out and buy another one. They need patience. Okay. There's 2 terms I've already used, but I want to explain them. A scion is a little stick from the upper part of a tree, okay, that has been selected for its stems, leaves, flowers, fruit, or nuts. It is called a scion. It's a French word. Now, a lot of us say bud stick, and I'll use both terms. That is the top with desirable qualities, and that's what we want to graft onto a rootstock. A rootstock may be selected for its ability of its roots to work in heavy soil, or it has the characteristics that we want, such as the quince underneath the pear tree. Now, there's a lot of things out there that we can graft, and the rootstocks under a persimmon would be the American persimmon. It works very well. There is another different persimmon that grows out in West Texas that is not the same persimmon, though. I do not know if it works. If you graft in apple trees, you want to be very selective, do a lot of research, because the MM106 will produce a fairly nice sized tree. However, the M7A and M26 will produce a semi-dwarf. And the M9, M27 will produce a tree that really can't support any weight. And what you do on that case, you take the limbs and you tie them to a fence, and the fence supports the limbs. When it comes to pears, in most cases, we want Pyrus caloriana. It works very heavy in heavy soils. There are some other rootstocks out there also for pears. And here again, the quince is dwarfing. You also want to make sure that when you get a rootstock that it is compatible with what you want to put on top. So compatibility is very, very important. Okay, on a pecan tree, any pecan tree growing in the right place in full sun, 30 feet from a slab, with good drainage, is a candidate to be grafted. Now, what you can do is you can actually transplant that little pecan tree that's, say, a 1/4 inch or a little larger in diameter. And the year you graft it, you can graft it at the same time. The same year that you plant it, you can graft it, okay? Now, if you were to have moved a pecan tree that's 2 or 3 inches in diameter, and you move it, say, about the 15th of February, you can cut your graft wood from your pecan tree and graft that tree immediately before it actually has any roots. And it also will start producing pecans in that 7 years. Now, this master gardener, when he became a master gardener, Mama says, "Son, I want you to graft my tree for me." Well, he didn't have any graft wood, but he called me and I said, "Yes, I've got graft wood in the refrigerator." Normally, this grafting takes place about the 2nd week in April is when it starts. So you got to cut your mama's tree off. So he cut the tree off. It was grafted because the scion I had, they were already in the refrigerator. Now, we normally don't use the wedge graft on this, but it's the whip and tongue, inlay bark, and the floor flap is what is normally used. But he didn't have a plan, but he knew who to call for the wood. So it worked out well for him. This is the tree later on. I don't know how many years, but I had to go look and follow up on it. And this is it now, or several years ago, okay? But the important thing is, let's get a plan together, something that we know we're going to do or what we really want to do. Okay, this is a plum thicket of Chickasaw plums. What I do is I go in there and cut most of them out, leave a strip. That's my learning zone. That's where I or anybody can go and graft. And if you lose one, you don't worry about it because you got plenty left. Okay. Now, on stone fruit rootstock, the Nemagard is resistant to root knot nematode, and it has been used in the commercial orchard since 1960. The Guardian is also another rootstock that works real well in our soil. And if you purchase anything from Florida, it will probably be on a Florida Guard rootstock. And that particular rootstock, when it puts out foliage, is very reddish looking, okay? Now, on citrus rootstock, stone fruit rootstock, drainage is a must. If you don't have good drainage, you're going to be disappointed. Now, when it comes to grafting, you may want to graft a peach or a plum from a seed or a sucker of a plum that's growing in the backyard. If it's in the right location, go ahead and do it because you don't have anything to lose. Okay, on this particular rootstock, I want it healthy, full sun, in the right location. On this particular one, you have two choices. You can graft the smaller limb up here with a wedge graft, or you can cut it just below the surface here for the new wood and put a wedge graft there. Okay, we're going to get into collecting your dormant wood. We want to collect wood that is compatible with the rootstock that you want to put it on. We want the graft wood to come from a tree that produces whatever we want, desirable fruit. Maybe it's blooms, whatever you want. Now, I normally start cutting graft wood about Christmas Day or the day after. The reason I do it that early because I know that some years, some of these peaches and plums will start blooming already, including pears will come out very early. So I want to cut that graft wood, store it in the refrigerator, and then in a couple of weeks, if I go back out there and the buds are not popping out yet, I may cut another batch of graft wood. And when it comes to using it, I may want to use the one that I cut latest. Okay? Now I'm going to look at the buds because the buds are going to tell me when to cut it. But I don't want buds that are swelling or popping out. When it comes to pecan trees, by the middle of February, you cut your graft wood and get it in the refrigerator. Get a variety that you want or somebody highly recommends. Okay, we want to cut these scions or budwood to the length needed. Some of us may want longer or shorter. We want to wrap it in moist paper. We're going to insert it in a plastic bag. We're going to label it, seal it, and refrigerate it. We're not going to freeze it. Okay, here we have cut, happens to be peach. I have cut to the length needed. For me, I normally cut about 7 to 8 inches max. Then I will take a little hot plate with a pan of water, and then inside of that, I'll put another metal pan with some wax in it, and I will heat it. And then I will dip the very end of these into that wax, both ends. Okay, I want buds that are nice, healthy, and plump. And if you look right here, that bud right there is a tip. This is a leaf that's going to produce leaves only. However, if you go right up here, there's 3 buds right there. The bud in the middle is foliage. It's going to make you a leaf. The 2 on the outside that are round, they're going to try to bloom, but we don't need those blooms, okay? Another thing I want to caution you about is when you're collecting this wood from the tree, if you go up into the upper part of the tree, there may be some limbs going straight up that there are no buds on, but you can see where the bud should be. This is caused by hot, dry in August. So we want to stay away from those, okay? Because it literally has no buds on it. When it comes to the storage of scions, we're going to, after we get them cut and waxed, we're going to wrap them in moist paper. I use newspaper normally. You can use old clean t-shirt, or maybe, I don't know, I've never used a dirty one, but we want to wrap this in something to hold the moisture. You might put bundles of 5 or 10 or whatever you're going to use in a day. You may have occasions only 1 or 2 buds. You want them wrapped individually. But in this one bag, I may have several different bundles of the same thing. Now, I'm going to label it. I'm going to date it. I'm going to put the variety, and I will also put on there, and most times, where this wood was retrieved from. Because if I go to somebody's house and collect their wood, I want to know, in case when I put it on, if something's wrong, okay, I want to be able to trace it backwards. I'm going to insert this in a plastic bag, seal, and refrigerate between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I do not want to freeze it. Now, I pay particular attention to the refrigerator that you put it in, because the refrigerator that is opened and closed continuously may not maintain that temperature. So There is no substitute for good wood. If you haven't done it right up to now, there's no reason to even try it. So we want to label, insert that in a plastic bag, seal refrigerator, and do not freeze. Here again, there is no substitute for good wood. If you find out your wood is not good, go find somebody that might have some. Okay, the cleft or wedge graft. Okay, we want to talk about when we're going to do this. Normally it's done in late winter or very early spring. Now, I have these yellow lines separated for a reason, because they're two different methods actually. If we're out there cutting our graft wood, we can cut a dormant scion that we cut and put in the refrigerator, and we can take one of those dormant ones and wedge graft it on a rootstock in our yard, the right rootstock in our yard. Okay. Now, in a period of time from now, the bark is starting to shrivel. You know the graft didn't take. So what you do is now go back to the refrigerator and get another piece of dormant wood and regraft that tree. Now, let me go over part of this again. That dormant wood you have in the refrigerator, if it's March and the tree that you want to graft has already got foliage coming out of it, it's okay to take that dormant wood from the refrigerator and wedge graft that tree that is already growing. Technically, the bark is probably slipping on that tree. And if it's small enough, there are some people that may want to take the buds, the dormant buds, cut them and T-bud. But I'm not going to go into T-buds now. But in September, we will. We want to graft that one, has plenty of sun and is very healthy. Now, let's go over this again. The dormant scion, cut directly from the tree, goes directly onto the dormant rootstock. Or later, that dormant scion from the refrigerator. You know, your neighbor knows you're grafting, and he may want you to graft his too, but he may be late. But you can take your dormant scion and go graft his tree. And then his neighbor wants it done too. So I hope that's clear. Now, we want to talk about the things, because we're getting ready to go out and graft right now, okay? We want the rootstock that's dormant or with the new growth, doesn't make any difference. We want that dormant scion. We're going to use, I use a budding tape. You can use paraffin. You can use wax. You can use Teflon tape. Teflon tape works very well. It's just expensive, that's all. Now, I would prefer a blade that's got a hard blade. I have used box cutters. They work pretty well, but sometimes the cut that you make may not be straight or square, if you want to call it that. Okay. Now, these pruners, I want them sharp and clean. This is a Felco 7 with a rolling handle in it, and when you use it all day long, you don't get tired, and this thing is probably 25 years of age, never been worked on. Now, when I talk about cleanliness, we don't want to move a disease from one tree to the other. And if you've got your wood and you're going to somebody's orchard, you sure don't want to carry any disease with you. It's very important. Now we're getting into the serious business now. You can take from the refrigerator this dormant scion that I've already cut the end of it off. And this tree right here will have a top on it. And what you do is you take this and put it up beside this one. And when you find the spot where they're both identical in size, you then cut the top off, split the scion right down the middle, probably about 1.5 inches down. You take this from the refrigerator and you cut off a piece of it so you want a new, fresh surface to work with. Okay. Then depending on how much confidence you have, you may do this anywhere from 8 inches to 12 inches from the ground, maybe even higher. A lot of confidence, you may get right down near the ground. But it just so happens on this one, this is the same size right here. So we've split the rootstock, we've trimmed the bottom off, and now we're going to look at the scion, the part that goes on top. This is it right here. And what we're going to do is about 1.5 inches up, we're going to cut to about the middle. One long, smooth, straight cut. One stroke is all we want, because we want one smooth cut on this side. We want one smooth cut on this side. Now, I've seen a lot of people when they start, they don't have the strength. They don't know how hard this wood is. And they actually cause it to look like chips or rub board on that surface right there. But we want that smooth surface. I suggest you practice this on some hardwood so they get used to it. And here again, a sharp blade is better. We do not want that rub board effect. So here, our scion is cut and ready to go into the rootstock. Now, we need to know something else. This is the pecan tree, but right here, that dark spot is the cambium layer. That's where the fluid flows. This part of the tree is not alive. The outer part of this bark is not alive. Only that very thin cambium layer is alive, and that's where the fluid flows, okay? So that's what we want. We need to know that. Here is our wedge, the flat side. There's no rub board. It's a smooth surface. Now, I want you to look at the shoulder up here. Later on, when we insert this, you're going to see about 1/4 inch of this shoulder sticking up. That's so that we can actually line up the cambium layer, okay? So we're now ready to insert that into the rootstock that has been split. Okay, it has now been split into the rootstock. Now, one thing you want to do is take your finger, because they're both the same size. You put your finger on both of these on both sides, and you should be able to feel that piece of wood, just barely. It should be even with the other one, because the bark on the scion and the bark on the rootstock is the same thickness. So theoretically, that should be lined up perfect when it's like that. Now, we want to look for proof. As you get older, you may need a magnifying glass, but now here's the shoulder. This is about 1/4 inch. And I have seen times where I cut these and I'm not comfortable with it. I pull the scion out, turn it around 180 degrees, try it. Then I've seen times I've cut it and pulled it out and recut it to make sure that it's in the right place. Now, one thing to think about on all these wedge grafts, especially these like this, there are 4 points. There's a point back here, 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 and on back side. There's 4 points. If you line up all 4 points and they're perfect, that's good. But you have to have 1 point in contact. The 1 point in contact will work. Now, once I get this in there and I'm satisfied with it, now look right here. See that little dark spot is difficult to see? That's the cambium layer. You want that cambium layer lined up with the cambium layer on the rootstock. When you get them lined up, then you're going to go below where the split was and anchor your tape, and you're going to come up and you're going to tape all the way and tape it up to here and secure your tape. Now, as I'm coming up with my tape, I'm constantly applying pressure to both sides of the rootstock to make sure that that cambium layer on the rootstock is pressed up and in good contact with the cambium layer on the scion. I want to tape it so there's no moisture loss. Okay. Now, if for some reason you've got 3 or 4 different types of peaches, you can graft one scion into the top of another one, and then graft this one into the top of another scion, and then graft that onto or into your rootstock, And if all three of them are lined up properly and all three of them grow, you have a tree that has three different varieties of peach on it. Normally, we use a light colored tape. In the spring, when it's cool, you don't have to cover it with foil or anything, okay? And here again, the plumber's tape is very, very good. Okay. When I tape some of these, I will start up part of the way, come down, up again, because I use the number of wraps and the strength of that tape to make it secure and strong and waterproof. Okay. Now that you're through grafting that little sucker that's growing in the ground somewhere, or even in a pot, if you got it in a pot, we want a bird perch. We want something standing up here higher than this, so when the bird comes in, it has a place to sit. Now, if you have to use foil and other methods, remember this: raccoons love foil and they love to play with it. Now, a lot of the grafts we do are not necessarily on the same size rootstock. So we're going to do something a little bit different, but not much. We're going to take the scion and we're going to cut the wedge. And you don't need this side of the cambium layer. So theoretically, you could take, and if you looked at the back side of this, it would look like the pie crust, the crust on a pie. And this right here would look like a pie because it's shaped like a pie. Now we're going to take that. We're going to insert that into the rootstock, which can be larger or smaller. The main thing is line up this cambium layer. And on this one, you only have two options: the cambium layer on this side or the one in the back. But you have to have one. Now on this one right here, when I start taping it from the bottom, when you get to here, your tape might not be wide enough to cover this and seal this. So this is where a piece of paraffin comes in very, very well. Now, if you grafted a rootstock here and it is 2 or 3 inches in diameter, what you'll probably do then is, without any, well, you tape it to secure it and make it bonded together, but then you'll take tin foil and cover right side out from here down below the split. And then you'll take a clear plastic bag, cut the corner out of it, pull it over here and tie it right here. And then you go below the foil, tie it again, and then probably in the middle, secure it one more time. And then we want the bird perch. Now, if this shrivels, then we're going to regraft it. I find that cutting it with a knife to see if it's green really doesn't tell you a whole lot on these. When that bark shrivels. Now, and another thing you can take into consideration is that if this was from one tree to the rootstock, when that tree where the scion came from, when it starts to bloom or put foliage out, this one should be starting at the same time. Now, if that bark shrivels or you knock it out or whatever, regraft it. Once your graft starts growing, the first thing that I will do is, if there is a string at the top here, I will cut that string once you get new growth 2 or 3, 4 inches long. What I don't want is, I don't want that string or whatever to girdle the scion. I want it to keep growing. Now, after you get maybe 4 or 6 inches of new growth, you probably remove everything here. When you remove all that tape, if you're not comfortable with it or you think it's not strong enough, retape it just from here down to give it some strength. Now, if you look on this other one over here, see that little black thing? That's a piece of wire. It's got a label on it that tells me exactly what that is, what variety it is. Because when you put 6 or 8 grafts on one tree, it's difficult to remember. Now, if you have a hurricane coming, what are we going to do? At this time, this size, we're not in hurricane season yet. But let's suppose you get into hurricane season. You got a lot of new growth out here that's 1.5 2 foot long. What you can do is you can take and put a splint right beside this rootstock, run it up here real high, and loosely tie the foliage to that support or stick. Or you can go in there and cut about, and if it's a bad hurricane and you know it's coming, cut 80% and 90% of the top off. What you want when the hurricane gets through is you want a piece of this green wood that's still growing, so you can go ahead and develop your tree. Now, in the wintertime, when that first cold front comes down through here and it blows out one of these, and you go out there the next morning, you see it laying there, but it's still attached to the tree. You pick it up, immediately put it right back in place, tape it, and try to make sure the cambium layer's all in contact, and then you cut 80 or 90% of your tree out. The reason we do that is because we don't know how much cambium layer is intact. We don't want the top of that graft to demand more fluid than what can come through that cambium layer. Okay, now in the backyard, I had a Santa Rosa plum, and we decided, no, we want something else. What we're going to cover here is healing over. When you graft, a pear tree grows slow. That means it will heal over. It takes longer period of time to heal over because normally the pear is slower in growth. Peach trees are pretty fast, so they will heal over in a year, year and a half, okay? This right here is a pluot. This was grafted early January, but the photo was taken 5/18, okay? Nice looking little tree. Now let's look at this a little bit further here. And this is the bottom of the tree where the graft was. It's not very strong. You could push it off, break it off or whatever, but we're going to let that thing grow in because it's already trying to heal over. We want all of this covered up eventually. Now, a year after it was grafted, this photograph right here was taken, and you can see some of that dark wood right here. If I would have went out there and used a chisel, I could have cut that out and it would have probably healed over a little bit quicker. Now, after a year and a half, this is that graft. That's the union right there. And on the screen on the right side, that's the photograph, same day that the photograph on the left was taken. Now, when the word bench graft comes to mind, I think of these guys up way north in the basement of their house grafting trees, putting the cambium, putting the bark or the scion onto the rootstock. Now, so what I did one day is, this is January, early January, I have a tree in the garden that I'm going to dig up. Name of garden rootstocks underneath it. So I cut, as the tree come down, I cut a horizontal piece of rootstock about 10 inches long, probably about not quite a ½ inch in diameter, and I put it in a bucket of water. Then I go to a tropic snow peach that is not budded out because this is early January. I cut a scion, and I'm going to wedge graft this. I actually go to the patio, sit down, keep the root moist, and I wedge graft this tropic snow peach into that horizontal root. And then I'm going to take it and stick it in the ground. And if you look right here, you can barely see the tape. That's how deep it is. Now, what I've got now is I use the graft, the rootstock, excuse me, I've used the root for a rootstock, grafted it. Now, some of these that were done like this, they were done and given to other master gardeners, and over a period of time, we followed up on them. Now, because this root is not from a seed, it does not make a taproot. But the distribution of the roots off of it does anchor the tree pretty good. I have bought 100 Nemogard rootstock and sit on the patio with the rootstock in a bucket of water, pull them out, wedge graft it, put that grafted rootstock back in the bucket of water, and then go out and plant them. That is a lot easier than planting and then going out there on your knees and grafting these. You know, the older you get, the easier you look for ways to do things, okay? Now, this works, and we've done it more than once. Okay. This is a pear tree, but for some reason, it needs to be regrafted. Why? I don't know, because this is not my tree. But what we're going to look at, we're going to regraft that tree though, because it is grafted. Now there's a proper way to cut this limb off. And what it is let's say you go to the back side of this tree and you cut in about a third of the way through the tree. And then on this side, you go up about a ½ inch or so and you cut until the tree breaks over and it falls over. The reason we do that, the reason we cut the back side is we do not want to cut this from this direction, and when it falls, we don't want it to strip out the bark on the other side. Now that we've cut from both sides and the top is gone, then we will drop down a couple of inches or whatever you want and make one long smooth cut, and you're able to handle that little piece of wood real easy. Now, this is a good photograph. Let's look at the very bottom of this tree. Look at the bark there. That's probably Pyrus Calleriana rootstock, and you can tell right here where it's grafted. But it's going to be changed. So this is a tool that this person has, but what I use sometimes, I've used a machete, a hatchet, an axe, that big butcher knife in the kitchen. You want to split it down real well. And this is where we're going to graft it in. Now, also I want you to look at right here throughout the bark. The rough edge has been trimmed, and this is fairly smooth. The reason this is done is because theoretically it will heal over quicker. Now, this tool is to use to pry the rootstock open so you can insert your scion. I don't have this tool, so I have a screwdriver about 12, 14 inches long. And that's what I use to pry this open. Then you insert the scion. Now you don't need a hammer. You can take your screwdriver and pry this thing open so that you can set the scion and line the cambium layer up at one time. Now, you've got one scion on one side. Now, do you want one on the other side? Well, I'm not sure, so I'm going to put one on both sides. So I line them up on both sides, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of, I'm going to take a Ziploc bag, cut both corners out, and I'm going to slip both corners over these bags, over those grafts. Then I'm going to tie the bag, excuse me, I'm wrong. I'm going to take that bright tinfoil, start from the split, and cover all this all the way up to the white wood, so that white wood is covered in tinfoil right side out to reflect the heat. Then I will tie, or slip the plastic bag over it. I will tie this point, I will tie the other one, and then at the bottom of the foil, I will tie it again. Now, we're talking about care after grafting. We definitely want the bird perch, because when that bird pushes off, it has a lot of force, and we don't want to damage our graft. When the growth starts growing, several inches long, 3 or 4, we want to remove the string at the top if it's taped or if it's tied with a string especially. We want to make sure that we do not girdle that scion. If it's a high wind and a hurricane, we're going to support it. We're going to cut it back. But what we want when the hurricane goes through, we want that graft to still be sitting there so we don't have to redo it next year. It's a long time to wait for next year. If you go out after that cold front and it's broke, it's laying out there, but it's still attached to the tree, pick it up, be quick, slip it back in place, tape it, and secure it. Let's remove about 80% of the top or more, because we want the cambium layer, if it's in contact, to be able to supply enough fluid to keep the top alive and start growing again. Now, there are suckers at the base of your tree quite often. Let's make sure they don't grow. Now, for some reason, you may want another one to grow. Now, in the event of the pear tree, the 2 limbs that were left out there, they could be left out there probably till summertime, and then maybe cut one of them off and maybe the other one the following year, okay? Now, we want to fertilize, water, force, and keep this tree growing. Now, this is the best book I could find. It's probably going to run you under $25. But if you're serious about grafting and all, when you look in this book, your mind will start racing because there's so many different techniques and information there available for you. Okay? Now, I'm going to, before I get through with that, I'm going to look and see if I need to come back with any information at all. I think that's it. And Ginger, you have it. Thank you, sir.
All right, Herman, thank you very much. We appreciate it. At this time, we're going to take questions from any of the participants. If you have any, you are more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask those questions out loud, or you can use the chat box, whichever you prefer.
Herman, this is Bill Pittman. I just got 2 questions.
Yes, sir, Bill.
If you are going to put a pollinator, how far or how close does it need to be from the tree that you're pollinating? And then the second question is, on the graft, you cut the waxed end off on the wedge part, but how about the top? Do you leave that wax on?
You can leave the wax on the top, and in commercial orchards per acre, they may only have 3 or 4 trees per acre of a pollinator. Does that tell you anything?
It's perfect. Thanks.
Where you are, all you need is 1 pollinator because of the distance. Okay. If you graft 1 good pollinator on a tree, you're okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Herman.
Okay. Anybody else?
Ronnie, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, Herman.
Yes, sir.
Have you ever heard of or experimented with using like a silicone caulk or something like that to fill in the air gaps before you tape it to give a little extra to it?
No, on the wedge, I have never experimented putting anything to fill it up because it's like putting concrete in a tree. I don't know. The tree's going to recover and it's going to get strong. As the cambium layer grows year after year, it's going to get pretty strong. Okay. I haven't tried filling them in with anything, but I don't see a need to. I never have thought about it even. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Good program.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, Herman, it's Bill again. I just got one last question. If
Yeah.
you're going to do a different size graft with a scion, and you only want to do 1 graft, not the double like you were showing at the end, what side of the scion do you want to put that, or does it matter?
I would look at the wind direction. When we graft a tree, put multi-grafts on them, limbs, and they're laying at a, say, a 75-degree angle. If you were to graft that, you would cause your split to be up and down, and then you would put your wedge graft into the top, so that when it's growing, the pressure will push against the tree. If the graft was underneath, it would pull out easier or separate easier. And we want that strength. Is that clear?
That makes perfect sense. I didn't think about the wind, but you're right. Thanks.
Maybe we need to have a class out in your orchard.
Anytime you guys want to come, definitely.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Herman.
All right, so we did not have any questions come through in the chat box, and if no one else has any other questions, we're going to go ahead and end the meeting. As I said at the beginning, we will be sending you an email later today with a link for an evaluation. We would really appreciate your feedback, so if you can take a few minutes to fill that evaluation out, we would appreciate it. In addition, in that email, there will be some handouts and the actual PowerPoint attached to that email so that you can have those for reference. So thanks everyone for attending today, and we hope you all have a wonderful weekend and join us for future seminars. Thank you very much.
Thank you.